Well, welcome everyone to the Intersection podcast. I am excited today to be able to be here with Karen Wilk. And she and I are going to be having a conversation about her book, Don't Invite Them to Church. The Intersection is a podcast that is about interviewing people on their faith journey. We want to hear their stories in the intersection, which is oftentimes where faith and life meet, merge, and sometimes collide. We just want to encourage you before we get started to join us on a Sunday morning at Discovery Church. You can join us on through our Facebook feed on Sundays at 10:30, our live feed of the services. You can also connect with us on our YouTube channel, Discovery Church Bowmanville, as well as Sunday Services podcasts. We're on Spotify, Google, Breaker, all kinds of different podcasts. You can find us out there. And just wanted to let you know that we've released another new course on our website under the courses on a guide to understanding the Bible. So if you're interested in going a little deeper in understanding how to interpret the Bible, what the different books and genres of the Bible are, and just interpreting Scripture in a more meaningful way, this is the right place for you. We just want to encourage you to go there. We're also putting out another Bible study course called Radical Apprentices, which is going to be coming up in February. And we'd love for you to be able to get some access to that material there. What I would like to do now is to introduce Karen, my guest here on the podcast. Hi, Karen. Glad to have you with us.
Great to be here.
Karen is the national team member for the Forge Missional Training Network and a missional leader developer for Resonate Canada, which is our denominational ministry. You can see the beautiful little logo up beside Karen there. She's also a neighbor, a wife, mom, and minister who's leading her own neighborhood community. And Karen, like me, she's got her doctorate in ministry, but her doctorate's in missional leadership from Northern Seminary in Chicago. And she loves discovering the incredible ways that God is already at work in our neighborhoods. Welcome, Karen.
Good to be here.
Karen, tell us a little bit about yourself. Let other people know who you are. One of the main reasons why you and I are having this conversation is because of your book called Don't Invite Them to Church. And I'd love for you to just give us a little bit of background about who you are and what's going on in your life.
Sure. Thanks, Martin. And it's great to have this opportunity to share some of my story with all of you. So I did grow up mostly in Ontario, but have been living in Edmonton now for over 30 years. And as you already said, Martin, married. We have 3 daughters that are all grown up. One's working on a master's in Ottawa and 2 are in Vancouver. But let me just tell you a little bit about how I got to where I am now. I started out in a large established Christian Reformed church when I got hired as a youth and outreach pastor, before I could be called pastor, actually, as a female. And I served there for about 12 years.
That's the river, right?
That was West End.
Oh, West End. Okay.
Right. And then out of that, this dream within the classes for a church plant in Edmonton began to form, and that ended up being the river. So we became a part of that launch team, which was very much modeled on kind of your seeker sensitive, attractional, what can we do to get people to come to us? And in that role, in that place, I began to really feel this little kind of disconnect or angst, I guess you would say, that I was rushing to get to outreach events and services and programs with the church plant. And oftentimes that meant avoiding my neighbors and not being attentive to the very people who we were actually seeking to reach out to. And that got me asking some different questions and beginning to read and listen and learn a little bit more about this, for me, brand new idea of being missional, of discovering and joining God in the places where we are, and that incarnational piece of what it means to be mission that is very much a part of the scriptures, not just for Jesus, but all through
Yeah.
the story. Yeah.
So that incarnational piece, that when Jesus became flesh and lived among us, as we call that the incarnation. When you think about that in relation to your neighborhood, what does that mean for you, incarnation?
Yeah. So what it has meant is we've shifted our focus from, as the book title says, trying to get people to come to church, to being the church in our neighborhood. So learning to live among, to be with, to participate in what's already going on in the neighborhood, practice hospitality, all those kinds of things. And just a story as to how that got started for us, this real conviction about wanting to learn to love our neighbors, to know our neighbors. We decided we'd host a Christmas open house in the community.
Okay.
For our block, for our neighbors. And for those of you who maybe haven't looked at the book, there's a bit of this story in there. And so we made invitations, we put them in everyone's mailboxes. We were too chicken to knock on the doors at that point. And the first people who showed up, we didn't even know if anyone was going to come. Across the street, a few houses down, an older couple, before they'd even taken off their coats, she said, "We just had to come and see who would invite total strangers into their home." And that word from her has continued to be convicting. It was an aha moment. My neighbors who the Lord I say I love has called and equipped and empowered me to love, think of me as total strangers.
Yeah.
And that was a moment that
Yeah.
began to change my focus and trajectory.
Well, we talk about this on this podcast, how at the intersection, life and faith and sometimes merge and meet and change our directions. Talk a little bit about that direction change for me, about how God was moving in that moment for you.
Yeah, in beautiful, scary, and challenging ways.
Right.
It required, I don't think we realized at the time, pretty significant shifts in terms of letting go of some of the parameters that we thought were core to what it meant to be the church, and reimagining that in fresh and creative ways, with that incarnational piece being the primary starting place and foundation and focus. So it led us into some different practices. And in terms of the river, the church plant, which I was part of the leadership team pastor there at that time, we decided we would do this 8-week fall series kind of kickoff, and be an invitation for joining in the neighborhood, learning to love our neighbors, and so on.
Yeah.
And that's what was the start of this. That's what became the book. And
Right.
then many of us, after that 8-week, in the olden days we called them campaign, wanted to continue this
Mhm.
journey. And eventually that led to this new body called Neighborhood Life, which is entirely focused on that kind of initiative.
So I had a neighbor down the street from me. We knew each other. He has the same birthday as me. He was born on the same day. It's funny how much information I know about him, and born in the same hospital even. So crazy. I was born in Hamilton, and he and I meet in Bowmanville, and same birthday, same hospital. Crazy story, except that he was at work and he had a workplace injury, and he responded health-wise to that workplace injury at home and was taken by ambulance to the hospital. And so I remember going out into the street and going down to see if he was okay. I saw him get on the ambulance. I told him that I was praying for him, and he went. And then I said to AJ, I said, I should go visit him. And I thought to myself, all of a sudden, here I am trying to connect with people in my neighborhood, and I have no idea what this man's last name is. I cannot go to the hospital and say, can I visit so-and-so? Because I haven't got a clue what his whole name was. And it it struck me, I think, somewhat like that conversation struck you from your neighbor. How well do I really know these people, right? Do I know them well enough to actually step into a place of community and hospitality with them in order to make some of this stuff happen? It was just kind of one of those, shocking moments. I never thought about the fact that I didn't have his whole name. I had his first name. I knew his wife's first name. Here we're born the same day in the same hospital, but I couldn't visit him at the hospital because I didn't know his last name.
Wow, that's such a beautiful telling story. And I hear that happen over and over again. And I really do think that that's God at work in many of us. And COVID actually has augmented that. It really has turned many church people's faces more towards their neighborhood, because for many of us, we couldn't go anywhere else or be anywhere other than in our neighborhood.
Yeah. And even just this, like, we've had a huge snowfall out here in Ontario this past week, and neighbors helping neighbors, and how people are so shocked by the fact that neighbors will help their neighbors. It shouldn't be a shock to us that we would love to help each other.
Exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the stories of, your conversations with people in your neighborhood, how things have started, what it's been like from their side of things about their experience with getting together as neighbors.
That's a big question, Martin.
Sorry.
There's so many stories and connections and ways that we are now involved and connected and feel like our neighborhood is our parish, our church. We have in Edmonton Community League and block connectors. So many of followers of Jesus have become block connectors, which is actually an invitation to be the point person, the party person, and the listener on your block, which just is so easy to step into, and such an opportunity to really nurture that caring connection right at the street level. Maybe I'll just tell you the story of one of my great neighborhood friends and companions on the journey. Her name is Julie, and she came from Pentecostal background, but because she went through a divorce and had a very difficult marriage at one point, she left that and to go beyond all that story. They got remarried and moved into our neighborhood and wanted to be part of the community. So we met for coffee and shared a bit of our stories. And she instantly became a block connector, bringing cookies, introducing herself to the neighbors as the newcomer, as the new person on the block, and had a block party, was just beautiful, became part of our block connector team. And then about a year and a half in, she and her family started joining in our Sunday morning little gatherings. Wonderful family. She got diagnosed with a terminal cancer. And the whole neighborhood, because she was so connected and integrated and loved, came alongside her and continue to come alongside her husband and two boys. She passed away in September. But the beauty of her participation in the community and what that did for the community, even in giving to her, as she had given so much to so many of us.
I can see it's emotional for you just telling the story. To have that kind of connection with someone in your neighborhood is incredible. I mean, we only think of that typically as family connections and maybe church connections, but definitely not neighbors in the community, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think in many ways, though, my neighbors would not name me as a neighborhood pastor. It happens over and over again. I've done 4 or 5 funeral celebrations of life, and people come to me and we journey together, and to others in our little group.
Right. Yeah.
And God just opened up that opportunity by us being available and present and
Yeah.
getting involved and
Yeah.
inviting others to get involved too.
And it's important to continue to foster those relationships. It's interesting to me what you said about starting this neighborhood thing, and she moved into the neighborhood, but it took a while for her to start coming to the kind of church service. I imagine that there was a long period of relational trust building that had to happen before that first time she came for a church service.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
I was just going to say, and there's lots of different ways of touching down with people, in a typical church, if I can put it that way. Sunday morning and the worship service is the focus.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that's one of the differences from my perspective. And I would say the majority who are really seeking to be on this journey. That's not the primary thing. The primary thing is those relationships, those joining in activities that are crucial to developing relationships that
right
in which God can be at work in significant ways. Yeah.
And so building some of those relationships, I heard you talk about the block connector, and what was the other thing that you said that you were doing in the community? So
I'm also involved in what's called a community league, and other places I think it's kind of your neighborhood association.
Gotcha. Okay.
It's all volunteers, and that group looks after kids soccer and runs all kinds of activities normally when
right.
COVID isn't happening, such as harvest fairs and monthly potlucks and book clubs and
gotcha.
all those kinds of ways people can get together and be with one another and enjoy each other's shared hobbies and gifts and experiences. Yeah.
Well, and we've been focusing at Discovery Church on how do we move people through to a place of trust. And one of the things we've kind of drilled down on is that we could do all kinds of events in the community, but if there's no places to either be side by side where I can serve together in the community, or places where we're face to face, trust is really not going to be built. It'll just be one-offs. It'll continue to be one-offs. And I think that for us as a church years ago, maybe even, and for most churches, we think that that's all that we need to be doing, that we need to be doing these one-off kinds of things into the community, which don't lead to that trust building process.
Right. And I think whenever the church is, if I can put it this way, doing 2 or 4, we won't get to with and among and in a sense. Just a really simple example. If I knock on the door of my neighbor and say, "Hi, I'm Karen. I'm from the church down the street," instantly a wall goes up.
Right.
There's this sense, I have an agenda. I want their money. I want to convert them. I want them to get to come to church. If I knock on the door and say, "Hey, I'm Karen. I live just down the street. I'm your neighbor," the absolute opposite happens. The wall goes down. We are on common ground. We already share this place and this love for where we are and this desire to make it better. And that's a very different posture for most of us coming out of church background.
So you mentioned doing 2 or 4 or with. Can you kind of just flesh that out for us so that people understand what you mean by that?
Sure. So doing 2 or 4 is the church planning a program or an outreach event, or even becoming a service provider, trying to meet a need in the neighborhood. We're then doing 2 and 4, and that instantly creates a different kind of relationship. Right. We're in control. We're calling the shots. We're deciding what others need and want, and we're expecting them to come and be part of us and what we're doing. With is very different, and among is as well. It's us stepping out and asking different questions discovering what's already going on in that place and joining in. So instead of starting the church's, I don't know, clothing drive or hockey team, etc., there's already a hockey team in the neighborhood. There's already a walking group. Go and be a part of that.
Right. Be with that group.
Yes.
Yeah. We often think we have to recreate the wheel when it comes to stuff like this, right? Neighbors are already desiring relationships at some level, and they've got connections already in the neighborhood.
And there's a lot going on in our communities that many of us are not aware of.
Well, yeah. And quite frankly, to say it as a pastor, too busy at church to even care about.
Exactly. And I've been there for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's take a turn into some of the ideas that you came up with, some of the ways in which these neighborhood churches look. What is some of the things that make them common together, and how are they sometimes different? And so just to give people an idea as to if they were interested in either being part of something like this or helping to start one of them, what would it look like?
So I think the first thing I would say is that it really requires some significant shifts. And one way to describe those shifts is by saying we have to learn to ask different questions.
Okay.
So as a church, we often ask, how do we get people to come to church? How do we get people to know that we're warm and friendly and that they should be part of us, that kind of thing.
Because we got a good thing going and you should join us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What kind of outreach events do we need to have to help our community? That's a 2 and 4 word. Those kinds of questions, we have to kind of leave those behind and shift from the quote unquote results that we might imagine coming out of that to questions towards relationship, and the shift to that being the focus. Not my agenda, not my right answers or solutions, even if I have wonderful things to offer. It's questions like, what might God be up to in this neighborhood? How am I going to discover that? How am I going to learn to be with and among and join in with what God's doing already? What are some of the signs of the kingdom in the neighborhood? Like really turning our faces and hearts towards our neighbors and seeing the good and beautiful that's already happening there.
Right. Yeah.
It's not just about us bringing that, but to be honest, at times my neighbors are better. They're more like Jesus than some of the people in the church. That might sound a little crass, but it's unfortunately at times been very true.
Well, give me some examples of what that looks like that either you've experienced or another group of people have experienced, finding where the kingdom is already at work in the neighborhood.
Sure. It's at personal levels and at, if you will, organizational levels that we can see and discover this. Julie is an example, her joining in and caring for her neighbors, quote unquote, outside of any church context. We have when someone has passed away in the neighborhood, I'm so impressed at how quickly there's a meal train set up, meaning people in the neighborhood are signing up to provide meals. There's people saying, let's get a gift basket together. Who wants to contribute? That's all happening. And it happens at that personal level, but then at the organizational level, people are asking questions like, how can we be more inclusive in our neighborhood? What kinds of events and activities and groups do we need to be working on? So for example, we spent a month, February before COVID locked us down, in the neighborhood doing TP conversations. So we had Indigenous leaders coming every Sunday afternoon, leading us in activities, teaching us. Right. And like, to me, I've never experienced that in a church context, right. But here my neighborhood is
Yeah.
stepping into it in huge ways.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like things we should have been doing before.
Absolutely.
So now you're connecting in where you're seeing the kingdom of God at work, and you're involved in some of those activities. How does it get to the point where you get to share about your faith?
God is a spirit-led thing. We, as I sometimes say, we show up and God shows off. It's that first and formational practice in the neighborhood is listening. And so we need to be listening to the spirit and listening to our neighbors and learning to discern and ask good questions and take the next step, follow up. So when somebody says, hey, we should get together,
Mm-hmm.
which happens over and over again in neighborhoods, people have a little chat over the fence. Hey, we should get together sometime.
Yeah.
And we don't.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be intentional following up on that. And, I think I tell the story in the book about neighbors who said they were reading inspirational books and having a conversation. And before we knew it, my non-Christian neighbors were leading a weekly group on spiritual practices in the neighborhood. It's amazing what God does.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So there's, I in my mind, I was thinking that there was a Bible study, that everybody got invited to at one point, or maybe people are thinking that neighborhood church is on a Sunday morning at your home at 10:30, which is in essence just the same thing as in a building somewhere, but in your home. Shatter my image here. Tell me what's real.
Yes and no to all of that.
Okay.
I think God grows those expressions that we would, label as what we expect and are familiar with in some contexts, and in others it may not look like that for a very long time, maybe
Okay.
never. In one under-resourced downtown neighborhood, they do Sunday afternoon tea and invite the neighbors and have what you and I might call spiritual questions.
Right.
But it's never going to be, a Sunday morning worship service with a band.
Right.
And yet God is at work in that place, and people are gathering, kind of the Acts 16. Paul and his companions don't find the place God wants them in the city, in any of the spots they initially think they're supposed to go. They have to go outside the city gate to a group of women by the river, which, for them would have been quite outside of the box.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I think we're learning to be open to that and to look for that and to step into it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you've written the book in 2010, right? 2012.
Yeah. A while ago. I was shocked to recall how long it was ago.
And you've been living this life, and it's produced a lot of conversations for people. Certainly has been helpful for many people in reconnecting with their neighborhood. You've probably witnessed and watched people try this in different ways and with different expressions. Tell me what you've learned since you wrote the book, or tell me about some of the other things that kind of come to your mind when you think, if I had a chance to write it again, I'd probably include a chapter on that, or I would reemphasize this.
Sure. So I think one of the things we've learned is that it's very freeing and life-giving to kind of let go some of our boxes and assumptions and step into this and join with God in our neighborhoods. God really is at work.
Mm-hmm.
And that keeps us going, discovering that over and over again. I think that the starting place posture that I may not have understood as well when I was writing that, of listening and being faithfully present, I would write and talk more and more about that, kind of the Luke 10, being the vulnerable one, taking nothing, discovering what it means to share peace and find the people of peace. I would dig into that more. One of the other things I would want to say to your listeners is that this is happening in all kinds of neighborhoods. Rick Adma, who lives in rural Alberta, has about 6 neighborhoods which look very different than, suburban Edmonton or urban Edmonton. Has many stories. His stories, engaging the same practices, are quite different. Like, they have horseshoe tournaments and barn raisings, and they,
Right.
Their conversations are on quads and not on the front lawn. We have other people in apartment buildings, and having Monday suppers with their neighbors on their floor every week, and out of that came a Bible study, and so on. So being open and trusting that the Spirit's bubbling this up in all kinds of different contexts would be one thing I would want to talk more about, I guess you could say. That no one is exempt or cannot do this, because we're all neighbors, whatever kind of neighborhood
Right.
we are in.
So we don't have to think specifically about little suburban, house, little boxes. We can think rural, urban, and even apartments as neighborhoods. Okay, cool. So how has COVID changed things?
How has COVID changed things? Well, we're learning how to be community on Zoom.
And everybody listening went, "Oh, Zoom."
and on the block, I guess I could say, in the green spaces, on the front lawn,
Right.
at the playground, wherever we're allowed to meet, which is mostly outside, which of course in Edmonton in the winter has its other challenges. Although, as you said, the shoveling snow is definitely a connecting piece.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think that we're learning to be more creative, and we're discovering lots of good and meaningful ways to connect with one another and to care for each other in the midst of it all. From the Resonate perspective, I would say that COVID has actually created a new awareness of the significance of our neighborhoods. We've had a huge surge in participation in kind of go local intro workshops and so on. And things like Next Door app, which is across North America now. Many more neighbors sign on to that. Our Buy Nothing group started out with about 40. It now has 780 members.
My wife's a member of the Buy Nothing group. She said that she keeps telling me stories of these long personal conversations she's having with people on the Buy Nothing Facebook group.
Absolutely.
Which is basically the way to trade things, right? You can say, I have this available, anybody interested, or I'm looking for this, anybody have that? And there's no money being passed back and forth. But the ongoing conversation she has, I mean, they're deep and personal and very meaningful, way to connect in a community. So,
yeah, I'm amazed at how much happens on the Buy Nothing group or in that group.
Right. All right, Karen, I'm just so intrigued by this. And one of the reasons why I asked you to talk about this is because, of course, I'm using your book for this preaching series called Don't Invite Them to Church. And this Sunday, I'm going to be preaching about refrigerator rights, having that kind of a relationship with someone where they feel like they have access to your life and to your home, because they trust you enough to do that. And at the end of this series, which is going to be ending in the end of January, I'd like to invite people into a larger conversation about practices or getting something started or getting something going around this idea of connecting in your neighborhood. How would they go about doing that? If you were to give some advice to me as the pastor or to a person in the church who's thinking about doing this, what would you suggest as a way to get started?
Well, we've already mentioned one, and I would reemphasize that, is start asking, if you will, neighborhood or God questions, because they take you in a totally different direction than how are we going to get people to come to church.
Right.
And then, it may sound very simple, but that attentive listening in our blocks, in our homes, in neighborhood places, asking neighbor questions, being intentional about continuing that conversation, getting to know them. That's really the starting place. Learning to live among, practicing neighborliness, loving our neighbors as we're called to do, and not just on a bumper sticker,
Right.
a slogan, right? And actually engaging in that way. And I think a question that I would add to the list is continually ask yourself, what's God's dream for my neighborhood? What would this place be like if it really did mirror and embody the shalom and the goodness and the abundance of God's kingdom? And how am I and my neighbors, how are we being invited to make that happen more and more?
Right. So some words of advice for me, a pastor who's thinking about going down this road. What do you think?
Martin, we have some great cohorts for pastors and leaders through Resonate. And I know that those conversations have been really encouraging and life-giving for me and others who participate in them. And the same for your congregation members, joining in with we call them learning communities, and that's the intention. None of us have the answers, and none of us really know where this is going or what it's going to look like. But I really believe that this is a new thing that the Spirit is doing. And as we begin to share those stories and discoveries and experiment and learn from one another and practice living among and being with, as we abide in Christ, God's going to continue to open up opportunities and show us the way.
Yeah. Well, Karen, it's been so good to talk with you about this. I'm so much enjoying the preaching of this series, and just want to let you know we had a kind of an impromptu Bible study get together with your book. Some young parents who are saying, you know what, this stuff really is resonating with us, and we want to have a conversation using your book on what this might look like in our community. And so it's been sparking some really great conversations. I just want to thank you for writing. I'd love to read some more stuff from you. So just encouragement, write some more stuff, Karen. You got a lot to say. And it's been such a blessing. So thanks for being part of the podcast. My pleasure. And great talking with you, Martin. How can someone get a hold of you if they're interested in connecting with you, Karen? Feel free to email me. Happy to receive you that way. wilkonline@shaw.ca. Okay. Or my CRC one. You have all that info, Martin. If you're interested in getting in touch with Karen directly, you can send me an email and or get in touch with me through this podcast, and we'll happy to connect you. Thanks, Karen, for being part of the podcast. The Intersection podcast is about that place where faith and life meet and merge. I'm so grateful to hear your story about how God was working in your life and doing that. Sometimes that intersection is a collision, and God really grabs our attention with some stuff. And for those of you listening here today, I just want to say thank you for being a part of this. And don't forget to join us on Sunday morning for our our Facebook Live service. You can also connect with us on YouTube on demand later on. We'd love to hear from you about how you're experiencing these podcasts. So thanks again, and we'll see you again next time. Peace to you and your neighborhoods. Yes, thanks.